everybody and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Just in case you don't know me, I'm Lucy. I blog over at Mrs H's Favourite Things. I'm a mum to two. I've got little Miss H who's 4 and little Mr H who's coming up to 15 months. And the reason I'm doing a video today is that this week is Baby Loss Awareness Week. I have had 4 miscarriages. So I had 1 miscarriage before we had little Miss H, and then I had a further 3 in our attempt to have our son, little Miss H, and to complete our family. I've decided that I wanted to do a video about my miscarriages, not necessarily about the feelings and emotions around them, because I've written about that quite a lot on my blog, but about the actual miscarriage itself, because I don't think there's much talked about what it is actually like to miscarry a baby. I'm very privileged that with my blog I get lots of women writing to me and asking for advice and sharing their experiences, often heartbreaking experiences. And so in some ways I've become a kind of unofficial coach for women who are going through baby loss or pregnancy after baby loss and just needs to chat to someone. For me, it's turning my negative, tragic experiences of losing 4 babies into a positive that I can help other women. One thing that's become really apparent from those conversations is that when a woman thinks that she's losing a baby or has been told that she's losing a baby, she doesn't really know what to expect or how to deal with it. So I thought I would share my story of my 4 miscarriages. I'm going to do it in 2 parts. This first part is going to be about our first miscarriage, which was the miscarriage we had back in July 2012, and it was before we had our daughter, little Miss H. We were very fortunate that I got pregnant very, very quickly, and everything seemed to progress really smoothly. And then I'd got to about 11 weeks pregnant and everything seemed absolutely fine. And then one day, probably sort of mid-afternoon, I started getting some ab pains. First of all, I thought it was just normal sort of tweaks that you have with pregnancy. Gradually, as the day wore on, these ab pains got worse and worse, and were getting quite uncomfortable. I went to bed that night wondering if something was happening to the baby, hoping that it wasn't, really hoping that it wasn't, but fearful that it probably was. And then I woke up the next day having not really slept very well and still had a lot of pain. In fact, I could barely move with the pain. So I phoned 111. Sorry, this little man's just come to join me for a bit. So yes, 111, they wanted to find out whether I had an ectopic pregnancy or not. And when they kind of ruled that out, because, you know, my pain was quite centralised, it wasn't isolated to one side, they basically told me to go to A&E and take some paracetamol. So that's what I did. We waited in A&E for quite a long time. They did a pregnancy test when I was there, still came back positive, so still seemed to be pregnant. And I was eventually examined by a doctor who felt my tummy, suggested that everything felt normal, and arranged a scan for me the next day. But I was left with the impression that my baby was fine, that my pregnancy was fine. Because I wasn't bleeding heavily, I probably wasn't miscarrying. So I went to bed with mixed feelings, but erring on the side of hope, I think. I went to my scan the next day, which my mum took me to. When it was happening, the sonographer was really quiet. She didn't really say anything, which I immediately took to be a bad sign. And I asked her, I said, is something wrong? Is the baby okay? And she said, it's not the size it should be for 11 weeks pregnant, and we're really finding it hard to find a heartbeat. But we will have a look and we'll take some more measurements. Anyway, it happened that our baby had either never developed a heartbeat or its heartbeat had stopped beating about 6 or 7 weeks, but baby was still inside me and my body still thought it was pregnant. So I'd still been getting symptoms, nausea, cravings, things like that. And I just sat there with silent tears rolling down my face. It was so surreal, so horrible. My mum just held my hand, and I just thought, I couldn't even talk. Silent tears rolled down my face. I can imagine that having happened, and when it did, it was quite a shock. So then got myself sorted, having had the scan, and I had to go and sit down and talk to the midwife sonographer about my options, because it was a miscarriage, and so I then had 3 options. So the options were have it medically managed, or have a D&C, or wait for it to happen naturally. So I remember turning to my mum and just thinking, oh, I don't feel old enough or mature enough or calm enough to make this decision. I don't want to make this decision. I don't want to have to choose one of these options. I want my baby. I want to be pregnant still. I couldn't understand why I wasn't pregnant still. I had been 5 minutes before. I'd been pregnant, and then I wasn't, but just because of a scan. I mean, I know it wasn't that simple, but that's how it felt to me. And so I had to make a decision. So I went home, I phoned Mr. H, my husband. I told him that we'd lost the baby, and he came straight home from work, and I remember him walking through the door and just holding me, and I just sobbed and sobbed. And we talked through the options, and I decided to have the miscarriage medically managed because I couldn't cope with the idea of the operation. I couldn't cope with the thought that I would be put under anaesthetic and then suddenly it would all be over. I couldn't cope with that. And I didn't like the idea of waiting because, I know it sounds awful to say, but I had quite a few work events coming up and things, and I didn't want to be at an event and suddenly start miscarrying, and then I just couldn't imagine it. Oh no. And also, I know it sounds quite odd, but for me, I was really struggling with the fact that I had been pregnant and then I wasn't pregnant, and nothing had happened apart from the ab pains, which had literally lasted 24 hours or something. I hadn't bled, I was still feeling sick, I still had the symptoms. I hadn't experienced anything to tell me I wasn't pregnant. And I needed to go through that. I knew it sounds awful. And maybe you're watching this thinking, gosh, she's strange. But I needed to go through the experience of miscarrying. But I needed to do it on my terms, because none of this was on my terms. None of it was. I wanted a baby. We wanted a baby. Mr. H and I. So none of it was on my terms. So I needed something to be on my terms. So I went into hospital 2 days later to sign all the forms. Saw an absolutely horrible consultant who referred to the baby as the retained products of conception and the miscarriage as the event and the process. It was all hideously scientific and clinical and cold, and it was our baby he was talking about. That was our dreams, our hopes, and he was talking about it in such cold, harsh terms. It was horrible. And then at one point he said, I should say that, you know, I'm sorry for your loss. Just like it was a tick box that he had on a form that he had to at some point offer his sympathies to us. So I'd read up quite a lot in the few days in between about what to expect, and I had been told that I would need my first lot of medication in the hospital that day. And I questioned him about this, and he said that wasn't the case. And if I asked him what it would be like, he said it would be like a bad period, nothing worse than that. I needed to be in hospital to have it done. I could, you know, just rock up any old time on the Friday, and they'd sort me out, basically. And so Mr. H and I then started on our way home, and we were in a taxi about halfway home, and suddenly I had a phone call from the consultant basically saying I needed to go back in order to take my first part of my medicine. So then we had to go back. At that point we were quite upset and quite angry about the way I'd been treated. So we were eventually taken into the office of the sort of head sister of the gynecology ward. She gave me my first medication. I had to stay there for a while to make sure I didn't throw up. And she talked us through a lot. She told me that it would be very unpleasant, that she didn't really want to tell me what would exactly happen, because, you know, it's different for everybody, and also she kind of knew that I wouldn't want to go through it if I knew exactly what was going to happen. She promised me that they would try and find me a private room, that it wouldn't be near any pregnant women, heavily pregnant women, or women who had just had babies. It wouldn't be near newborns. And she basically said that I needed to wait until Friday morning and a phone call from them to tell me when or if to bother coming in. So on Friday morning we got a phone call saying that the only private room that they could give me was on the delivery suite. Was that okay? And I said yes.